I'm here with Doug, who you'll know as the bearded wanderer from Telford, who goes and takes his camera to some of the most wild and secret places that you can imagine. So, Doug, welcome to Telford Live podcast. How did you get into this?
Well, it's a bit of an odd one. I think I first sort of got interested in sort of abandoned places and sort of what happens when people aren't around, oddly enough, from playing the Fallout games. Originally, the first one back in 1997, from just seeing an abandoned world with nothing in it just sort of caught my attention. And then sort of discovering that there are places that look like this that exist in the real world just got me hooked. So going out there and finding them and just pretending that I'm wandering around the apocalypse more than anything, it got me started. And then that sort of dragged me into the history and just got deeper into these things.
And what was your first camera? What was your first device that you bought?
I think the first actual proper camera that I had that was mine was a Canon 60D, so probably about 20 years ago. But prior to that, I'd been using other cameras. My dad's a photographer, so I've had cameras around my entire life. So I've always been familiar with them. But that was a Canon that was the first one I ever owned that was my camera.
And you take your camera out with you. So tell us about the kind of places that attract your attention.
It can be all sorts of things. Generally, I just like the look of things when they've sort of been left to their own devices. I just find that humans as a species, we like to build these really ordered structures. But when we leave those structures behind, nature starts to sort of come back, and nature is in nowhere near as ordered and structured as what we are. So, you could get two identical houses, sit them next to each other and leave them alone, and they will decay and grow back in their own different ways, just depending on which way the wind blows or where the sun hits it. So just seeing how nature takes this ordered structure that we create and slowly just covers it over and takes it back fascinates me. And that can be places that have been left out in the woods forever, or it can just be things on a street corner like neglected signs that have just sort of been forgotten about, and you can see they've all sort of faded and rusted away. So any of those are what captures me, really.
And how do you go about researching somewhere, or is it just that you're out for a walk and you spot things?
It can be various. I mean, I spend a lot of time on Google Maps looking at things from the air and going, oh, does that have a roof? It doesn't look like it. Or quite often I get like the old maps. You can get these, I think it's a project up in Scotland where they've taken all the old maps and overlaid them over satellite imagery. So you can sort of look and go, okay, well, there was stuff here, and then fade and go, but there's nothing there now. I wonder what's hiding under those trees, and is there something still there? And then I think after a while, you do sort of develop a sort of a sixth sense for these things. I'll sort of drive down the road and I'll just be like, there's something in those bushes. Your brain sort of learns to see through and spot hints of stuff. So yeah, you kind of go, oh, there might be something in there. And then sometimes I literally just go, I wonder if there is anything in there. You sort of go, well, actually, this was a built-up area. There was stuff here, but there's a copse of trees there that may not have been there before, so I'll just go clambering through and seeing if there's something in there, and sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised.
Do you ever get surprised by the landowners who come out shaking their fists?
As of yet, I've been quite lucky, but I tend not to go to places that are heavily populated, or I tend to avoid places that have got a lot of foot traffic and people wandering around, because I'm not massively into it to go, or some people love sneaking into places that they shouldn't be, or specifically like to harass security guards and play cat and mouse. I don't like that. I've got too much expensive equipment on my back to go running away, and I'm not exactly subtle, so usually I'm all right. I'm yet to have been told off properly yet, and quite often the odd time I have been challenged, I'll go and speak to the person and say, well, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's my photographs. And I've had people sort of give me sort of guided tours or show me around or give me a little bit of information. But where possible, it's either somewhere that's that neglected no one cares at all, or where I can, I'd rather get permission and maybe even speak to people who know about these places, because that's where you find the real history and some real information, rather than some of the made up information you find online from other explorers with their murder houses and all sorts of crazy tales.
It's amazing how the sort of urbex community has grown. I know that's not something that you compare yourself to, but there is a desire for people to look at places where perhaps they've had their best days, and yet some of the photographs that you publish on your socials, and we'll post those in the comments below, I think they look better now than they ever did before.
I find that as well. Yeah, I quite like just as seeing how things have changed and how they're different. And I know I do. My photos are quite stylized compared to some others. Some people do just go with a mobile phone and just take documentary snaps and say, "Here's exactly what it looks like." Whereas I try to put a bit of mood into it. I try and go, well, here's how it looks in my mind's eye. And I think sometimes just seeing, what was somebody's house, what was somebody's kitchen, what was once a very lived in space is now just sort of filled with weeds and slow decay. And it just gives it that strange ethereal feel of the sort of quiet decline of what happens when humans just walk away from a place.
So we'll talk about your camera equipment in a moment, but is there a lot of post picture processing that you do?
Reasonably. I stick everything through my computer and I'll play with lighting and colours. I try and get as much as I can in camera. I don't ever use AI to add things in there or create places that aren't real. When I am sort of editing the photos afterwards, it's more about sort of creating a bit of mood, maybe making certain colours pop, maybe, making the greens look a little more faded than they are. So quite often, they don't look exactly like they would do in real life, but it's a real shot, but I've added what my mind sees to it, which can take varying amounts of time.
Okay, so we're going to have a look at some of the photos now that you've identified as your favourites, and the first one is RAF Tilstock in Shropshire. That's just north of here, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Most people now know that as Priest Heath, and that's one of my favourite places to go and visit, mainly because most of it you can walk around freely. There are footpaths that go through it, and it's an old site. It was originally a World War One site. It was a training camp, which oddly enough Bob Marley's dad was stationed there. It's a nice little tidbit about that one. But it then became an internment camp for refugees, German-speaking refugees, so they could be processed before being allowed to wander around the country, just to make sure they weren't spies. And then towards the end of World War II, it got turned into a bomber training site because we got a lack of well-trained bomber crews. So that's what Tilstock became. And then after the war, it just kind of got left. Obviously, part of it's still active as the parachute in place, but a lot of what the old runways are just now fields, and most of what was the actual base with the buildings proper is essentially a forest. So seeing these, what was once a very active, busy and important site, now just sort of crumbling away into the woods and sort of being overgrown and forgotten about, I could spend days wandering around there.
And you can see that from the road as well, can't you? Parts of it are still visible from the A41.
Yes, and yeah, literally. The photograph that I've shared with you it's about 6 feet away from the main road. So, although my photo, which is why sort of when I do the editing on my photos, is you get this impression that it's some long lost building in the middle of a jungle that's been forgotten about forever. But while I'm stood there are cars and trucks racing past me at 60 miles an hour. So it's not quite as empty as you think it would be, but it's what you see there is just fantastic that it's still there, but also a bit of a shame that it's slowly falling apart.
Do you keep going back to these places to see what the progress of nature is, and the change in the seasons can change the light dramatically? Yeah,
I do. I'll go multiple times a year to some sites, especially sort of local ones. Sometimes when I've got a bit of free time, I'm like, I'll just nip out there and see how that's looking today. And you do see, and it's interesting to see how quickly some places can change and decay. Tilstock being an example, it's been there for 80 odd years now. However, in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, there's been quite a rapid decline in the buildings as they've sort of reached this tipping point where nature's finally fully taken over, and what structures were there can't quite hold their weight anymore. And it's gone from being, these were quite intact 5 years ago, to that's on the floor now. So it's always interesting to see how quickly they can just go from something to nothing.
It doesn't take long, does it, for nature to start coming back?
No, and that's one thing you see. You'll find some places that have been empty, maybe just a matter of months. People forget it's the use of places that actually keep them alive. When people leave a building, it stops being maintained and it stops being looked after. They can go downhill incredibly quickly, especially if the weather can get in. If there's a window that's open or a bit of a hole in the roof, as soon as the water and the air can get in, they can collapse incredibly quickly.
Move on to the next one, the old power station bridge. Now, this isn't very far from us at all here, is it? It's the old Buildwas power station. So just tell us about this one.
This one, it's one that's always interested me. I just love driving past it. I love seeing it because it's like an old style truss bridge. It doesn't, we haven't built bridges like that for decades. So the fact that it's still sat there, especially now that the whole power station's gone and that whole site's been redeveloped. I've never walked across it. I'd love to walk across it, but there's just too much razor wire for me to, and I'm not quite that athletic. But so pretty much all my photos I've taken of that are literally me right up against the fence, poking my camera through it, or sort of trying to climb around under the side of it and getting some shots. But it's just something about that. It just looks. I mean, it fits into my my love of Fallout. It fits into that sort of. It's got that sort of retro vibe to it. But then now seeing it with a housing estate literally appearing on the other side of it. I mean, the last time I went to took shots across it, and you've got diggers and everything the other side, and the guy's doing a bit of groundwork. So I hope that will actually get saved. I think there has been talk of that actually being turned back into like a footbridge when the houses are open, and I hope they do keep it, because you don't see bridges like that anymore.
It'll almost be a shame if they try and sort of refurbish it and bring it back to normal, because it kind of fits the vibe down there, doesn't it, with the paint peeling and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I get a lot of I'm always torn with some of these places. I love how they look when they're decayed, but there's also the fact well, if it stays like this and it isn't maintained, it won't last forever. It requires that sort of maintenance to keep it going. So sometimes it's that balance of going, can we keep the slightly rusty look of it, but can we just make sure that that's surface level and that structurally everything's still sound? But I'm aware if they do bring it back to life, it probably will get restored, which is still a fantastic thing, because it means it's a piece of history that isn't lost forever. So a lot of what I do in my photographs, I always see I'm capturing them in this sort of transitional period. They were in use and they were once incredibly important to somebody, and now they're in this position where they're of nothing to anybody. But where do they go from there? Some places get saved, some places just get demolished, some places, get burnt down. So you never know what's going to happen next, So I'm capturing it in this weird forgotten about period that people kind of ignore, to sort of go, well, here it is right now. It's not necessarily about the past. It's not about the future. It's about, this is what it looks like now. Only time will tell what happens to it.
What sort of feedback do you get on your photos when you publish them on social media? Because comments can be difficult, can't they?
Yeah, mostly positive. The overwhelming majority of people, when they see it, they get it, they understand it, they go, they're quite amazed by it. I'm always love the comments I'll get off people when they say, "Oh, I remember when that was active. Where I used to use there, I used to go there, I used to work there." And I've heard some fantastic stories. I've had even from houses, people with relatives going, "Oh, that's that was my granddad's house," and stuff. And you hear a bit of stuff. You get some people who just grumble and go, "Oh, what you're doing there? You should stay away from that. Oh, you're going to get more people turning up," which is why I don't tend to put locations as a default, because a lot of the time the exact location doesn't really add anything to the photograph. It's but some people will always be like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't have been anywhere near that." And then more often than not now, I'll get people just flat out going, "Oh, that's AI. That's not a real photograph. That's not real at all." Which is, I'll then sort of just a bit sarcastic back in the comments, or I'll go, "Look, here's the actual raw photograph, or here's some video footage of it." But even with video AI, that's getting harder these days. So.
It is, and with AI, you can really see people getting taken in by this. The quality over the past 18 months has just rocketed beyond belief, really, hasn't it?
It has. Hopefully, I think with AI, I think we're reaching a bit of a plateau. I think it's rocketed in quality as the technology's getting better, but it's kind of reached a point with image generation where it looks real. It can't go beyond looking real. There's not much else it can do, and I think to a certain point it's starting to sort of eat itself, really, because there's so many AI images online. It's training itself on its own AI images, so you're getting a lot of stuff that's you've seen it before. And I think that's the downside with a lot of the AI footage. You're always seeing stuff. It's somebody else's image that it's just reworked or mixed in with some other stuff. It can't create anything that doesn't exist. Only humans can do that currently. As soon as AI can do that, then it's not AI anymore. It's actual intelligence, which I think we're a long way from that ever happening.
Do you think there should be some legislation to identify AI images, or try and prevent people passing them off as real?
I think something needs to be done with it to a certain degree. I mean, there's a limit between allowing people to use these tools for legitimate purposes, and they do have some legitimate purposes, and dealing with the bad actors that are just pumping out tons and tons of garbage effectively just to get clickbait and engagement bait online, which is it's effectively plagiarising other people's material. So I think there needs to be more done, certainly from from within the platforms themselves. I mean, they've got the capability to say this is AI, and they do already say you're supposed to tag it. But I mean, if someone's going to dodgily share AI, they're not going to tell you that they've created it fake, because it gives away their lie. So it's a hard question to where do we go from a legislative point of view to say actually this has to be labelled as AI, and then what level do you say is it no longer a real image, because a lot of the tools that you get within Photoshop call themselves AI because it's a buzzword, but is it AI? It's just removing specks of dust, or it's doing a bit of noise reduction on the photo. Is that really AI? So it's a tricky question, but I think that's going to change a lot this year. I think we're going to see some major changes on how it's used or what people do with it. So I think it's one to watch.
When we're looking at your next photo, I can imagine some people saying that this is AI. It's a boat in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, yeah. This one was. I've included this one because I just thought it's a good example of the strange things that I find that you wouldn't normally expect. And yep, that's a boat halfway up a hill in the middle of Shropshire, about 13 miles away from the nearest navigable waterway. So how it got there, we don't know. Most people seem to reckon it's a former bullseye winner. Just look at what you could have won, and they're going, "Wow, can't really use that in Shropshire." So, but yeah, that one's. I've been accused of using AI on that particular image a few times, and no, it's really there, sat in a field, and it's a real boat. As far as I can tell, it's one that somebody built themselves. When I did a bit of research into it, it looks like one of the ones you could buy a kit, or you bought the plans for it, and you bought all the wood, and you cut it out and stuck it together yourself. But I don't think it's seaworthy anymore, unfortunately.
You do wonder how that landed up where it landed up. Somebody put it there, and the backstory to some of these photos is where the real intrigue comes in, isn't it? And all that the history. It doesn't have to be that old either, but the history, the background, it really gives another dimension to the pictures when you can add that in.
Yeah, and that's it. I think that's a good example of how these things get abandoned, because a lot of these times, that boat was built with purpose, and a lot of these buildings were built with purpose, but they get abandoned very quietly. Just one day, nobody goes back to it anymore, for whether they've either forgotten about it, don't want it, they've moved on. But for one way or another, what was once something that was very useful or meaningful to somebody is just quietly left behind for everything to take over. So I think that's a good example of it.
And on the next photo, which is an internal shot of an old kitchen, it's kind of the same. At one point, someone made their last cup of tea in that kitchen.
Yeah, that's it. One day, at one point, that would have been, the centre of someone's life. The kitchen's the busiest place in a home. That would have been noisy, busy, the smells, the sounds, everything. And then one day, the people moved away. And that one's an interesting one because it's not that far away from a main road. And from what I gather, the family that did own that actually sort of consolidated their earnings, and they moved to another farm that still exists, but it's by the main road. And that's where a lot of these things have sort of changed as the world moved on, especially in sort of the latter half of the 20th century. Cars and everything came in a bit more common. The places that were next to what became the main roads have stayed active. So you do see these, 200-300-year-old houses, still perfect condition, people live in them. But the ones that were, 500 metres back from the road, or, actually in the middle of a field, not quite so much anymore, because people are like, well, I'd rather live by the road because I've got a car now. It wasn't so bad when you got a horse to ride back and forth, but and you've got a muddy path to drive your car down, you'd rather live in the house that's by the road. So that's quite a good example of how perfectly usable places, there was nothing wrong with the building, it wasn't in a bad location, the farmland around it is all still active and used, but just the house itself wasn't needed because the farmhands don't need to live there anymore because they've got a house down the road and they can drive to work every morning. They don't have to live on the field they work. So it's always a good example of how times can change, in probably within a generation.
And what sort of things are you finding in these places? There's obviously some relics in the buildings themselves, but the day-to-day detritus of life, you must find some strange things in these places.
Some odd bits and bobs. Quite often some of these places have just been cleared out entirely. Especially with the old farmhouses, quite often they're lived in by sheep these days as they wander through. But you do get the odd surprise. There's one place up near Ironbridge where I found a newspaper that's been sat there since 1984. And this house has no doors, no windows. You can see other people have been in and out of the house because, for some reason you always find a Red Bull can seems to be left behind. I don't know why it's Red Bull, but it's always a Red Bull can that gets ditched. I drink a different brand of energy drink and I take my rubbish with me. But Yeah, it was a newspaper from 1984 that sat in this house with no doors, no windows, barely any roof, and it's still perfectly legible. And that was a bit of a shock. So I'm like, that's nearly as old as I am. Whereas, if I'd leave a newspaper outside in my front garden, 3 weeks later, it would turn to mush.
And just thinking about the final picture that we've got for you, and there's a video along with this as well, which is quite an evocative place, isn't it?
The nuclear site. This was probably one of the favourite places, which is why I've included this one, because this one does have a vibe to it. I mean, to look at it and even to drive past it, if you're on the road nearby, you go, oh, it's just a bit of concrete in a field. It doesn't really mean anything. But when you realise that it was actually one of the sites where our nuclear weapons, well, I say our nuclear weapons, they were American nuclear weapons that they'd lent to us because they hadn't developed intercontinental ballistic missiles yet. So they needed something within striking range of Russia. They gave us a load of nukes to set up about the country. And yeah, at one point, for about 5 to 6 years, there was a nuclear missile sat on that site that could have been set up and launched within a few moments' notice, and quite potentially was stood up and ready to launch, because we're discovering with freedom of information requests over the years that actually a few times throughout the Cold War, we were moments away from a button being pushed that it all, stepped back at the very last moment. So that one really sort of made me quite interested. It gave me quite a vibe just to go, well, actually at one point somebody was stood here ready to press a button it would have ended the entire world because of mutually assured destruction, as they called it, which, MAD is about the best acronym for it. The idea that, well, if we detect your missiles launch, we'll launch our missiles, we'll all be dead. And the fact that somebody would have had the responsibility to go, I've got to press that button, knowing what that would do, was quite an ominous thought and really had a vibe to the place. But now almost forgotten about, and that you can see where the farmer's ditched some of his junk there nearby, and to everybody else it's just a bit of concrete.
And there are a number of these places around, aren't there, where they've been abandoned over the years, government places as well. I know there's one in North Shropshire, which is the secret bunker.
Yes, yeah, the famous secret nuclear bunker. Fun story. I nearly got married there. We actually spoke to them when I was getting married as part of, as I said, a big fan of Fallout and nuclear stuff. So we spoke to them. They were willing to put a wedding on. We went with somewhere else in the end. But but that's one of the examples where these places have been saved and someone's maintained it, and you've got the history of it. But for every place that was part of our Cold War or World War II history that's been maintained, and you can go and visit and you can see the history behind it as it would have looked, there's like 10 times as many places that are just left behind and completely forgotten about. And only if you sort of know what you're looking for, you can go, oh, that's an old tank trap, and oh, that's an old pillbox. But otherwise they've either been gone, redeveloped, or just completely overtaken by nature.
So where's next on your list? What kind of places do you have in mind for 2026?
Haven't decided yet, but again, that's part of, when I go exploring, part of it is just I'll pick somewhere and go, I'll wander around that area, see what I can see. And I want to this year, I'm trying to cover more places that are potentially within plain sight. I want to cover more places where, you might walk past it 100 times and either never notice it's there or know it's there, but perhaps I can show it in a different light. I mean, people will walk past some of these places and go, oh, that's an eyesore, that's disgusting, it needs knocking down and redeveloping. But I'd like to sort of show it in that slightly more evocative way, in a different way, with a bit of mood and feeling to it that maybe makes somebody go, oh, actually, maybe it's a bit more to it than that. So I think this year I definitely want to cover more places that you might not have ever noticed were even there, because our brains sort of filter some of this out. I think we're trained not to see the things we don't want to see. So when people walk down the street, they might not notice that the cracked sign or the peeling paint or the overgrown bit of bush there, whereas I want to try and capture a few more of those. And then otherwise, I'm just going to be back on Google going, ooh, what's this from the air? And, whenever I'm going somewhere new for any particular reason, I'll always have a hover over the area and go, is there anything nearby there? I mean, I have got hundreds of pins. I've got a map that's got loads of stuff marked on it, some of which I'll probably never get to, or by the time I get there, they might be gone completely. But I'm never short of somewhere to go and explore.
And what do you take with you when you go on these explorations? What camera equipment do you take with you?
Well, main camera is this one that's sat in front of me here. It's just a Sony A7 III, which is probably about 8 years old now. I've actually got a pair of these, but it's just a standard mirrorless camera. I've got one of these. I've also got my GoPro, which is normally strapped to my chest because that gets this nice behind the scenes footage, or at least might capture things if I've forgot to point my camera at it. And then I've got my drone, which I haven't got with me today, but I've got just a standard DJI drone. But that's my usual equipment, which does the job. But I could do most of it with my mobile phone if I wanted to. I just enjoy the process of using a real camera to take the photographs with.
And do you go on your own? Because I know a lot of your photos are like moody selfies, aren't they, and atmospheric selfies. Do you use a self-timer for that?
Yes, yeah, I've got the self-timing mode on that camera, so quite a lot of the time, if you were to see me out taking photos, you'll see me setting something up with the camera, then running in front of the camera, standing around for about 10 or 15 seconds, running back, having a quick look to see how it looks, and then doing the same over and over again. So it's generally me, because normally I've either not got anyone to go with, or I quite often go out just because I've got a bit of time going, oh, what can I do today? Oh, I'll just nip out there. So I haven't got anyone to take with me. My wife's not doing it. She sits at home and tracks me on her phone just in case I don't come back. She knows where to send the emergency services in case I've fallen through a floor.
So there's we can look forward to a lot more content from you over the next few months and years. It always amazes me, the photographs that I see on your feed. It's places that sometimes I recognise, but not in your photo. It takes a little bit of focusing in to think, flipping it, there he is. I've been there. Didn't look anything like that. And it's having that eye to capture something that most people don't see. It's like a sixth sense, isn't it? When you...
Yeah, and again, that's what I like to see with my mind's eye. It's that's I try and impress the feeling that I get from a place on camera rather than just a straight documentary capture of it, which some people do brilliantly. They'll go to places and they will snap absolutely everything, so you've got this really solid record of everything, that house and the condition it's in. But I try and be a bit more, well, a bit artsy-fartsy with it to give it a bit of mood and a bit of just something else, so you can get a feeling from the photograph rather than just oh yeah, I know that building. You might a little more evocative.
Fantastic. Well, Doug, thanks so much for coming down. I will put links to your socials in the comments below this, and I would recommend that you go and follow Doug. Keep an eye on what he's doing, because some of those photos will blow you away. So thanks for coming in, and best of luck with the future.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.